Listen to the land. Watch, learn, observe it, respect it, and realize it's your relative.
Long before the skyscrapers, subways, and endless rush of yellow taxis, New York City was something else entirely, an empire built on oysters. These waters, from the Hudson River to the Long Island Sound, once held the largest oyster beds on the planet. Not thousands, not millions, but billions. Oysters so abundant that they filtered the entire harbor's water every few days, so massive that they shaped the very geography of New York's coastline, and yet, today, most New Yorkers walk these streets completely unaware that their city was once the oyster capital of the world. The story of New York's oysters doesn't begin with the street carts or fancy seafood restaurants. It begins thousands of years earlier with the original caretakers of this land, the indigenous people who lived here long before European settlers arrived, like the Lenape and the Algonquin-speaking people of this region, understood oysters in a way modern society is only beginning to appreciate again. They harvested them not with metal rakes or dredging tools, but by hand, taking the shallow waters and leaving deeper populations untouched. Their shell middens, massive mounds of discarded oyster shells found in places like Staten Island and the Bronx, tell us that they ate oysters for thousands of years without depleting them. The Lenape saw oysters not as an endless resource, but as a part of a living ecosystem, something to be cared for and preserved.
Indigenous cultures looked at land and water totally differently than European cultures. In our culture, land, water, and its resources, they are seen as gifts. Where in European cultures, they're seen as commodities, something to own, something to sell, right? With us, it's a gift. So when you look at something through that lens, you treat it a little bit differently.
When the Dutch arrived in the early 1600s, they were stunned by what they found. The waters of New Amsterdam, as it was called, were so thick with oysters that ships had to navigate carefully to avoid running around on reefs. Oysters were so plentiful that they became a staple food, eaten by the rich and poor alike. But it wasn't until the British took control of the city and renamed it New York that oysters truly became an obsession. By the 18th and 19th century, oysters were more than just a food in New York, they were everywhere. They were served in the finest restaurants and the grimiest taverns. They were sold raw, fried, stewed, or baked. They were pickled and packed into barrels to be shipped across the country. And if you were hungry in the streets of Manhattan, you didn't need to look far. By the late 19th century, the waters of New York Harbor were no longer the pristine, oyster-filled paradise they had once been. Raw sewage, chemical runoff, and factory waste poisoned the oyster beds. Once a natural filter for the harbor, the oysters themselves became dangerous to eat. One by one, the great oyster banks of New York shut down. By the early 20th century, the city that had once been defined by oysters had lost them almost entirely. And for nearly 100 years, the oysters of New York were nothing more than a memory.
We're raised this way. For example, I grew up off the reservation, and I would visit in the summertime, spending time with my great-grandmother, pretty much camping out there all summer long. And the things that I learned from her were so valuable. My aunt had invited us out to go wild strawberry picking, and I was so excited because not growing up on the reservation, this was a treat for me. Strawberries were one of my favorite foods. So I came across my very first strawberry patch, and I was so excited. So I start pop, 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 eating those strawberries like crazy. My auntie from a distance goes, you don't eat the first strawberries you see. You wait until you see that there's a healthy population of strawberries. Because if you eat all those strawberries and wipe them out, there'll never be strawberries here again. So disappointed, I continued on, and I saw my cousins up on the hill. They were harvesting strawberries, and I ran up there, and I was like, yes, I can't get in trouble now, right? So I pop, 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 pop. I'm eating those strawberries. I stretch my shirt out. I start putting strawberries into my shirt. I'm going to take a whole bunch of them home. You only take 1/3 of the strawberries for yourself. You leave 1/3 of the strawberries for the animals, because if the animals don't eat, we don't eat. And you leave 1/3 of the strawberries to drop as seeds so future generations could eat.
But today, a new story is being written. In the same waters where billions of oysters once thrived, scientists, conservationists, and volunteers are working to bring them back. Projects like the Billion Oyster Project are rebuilding reefs, using discarded shells from restaurants to create new habitats where baby oysters can grow. Oysters aren't just making a comeback, they're reclaiming their place as the lifeblood of New York's waters. Maybe, just maybe, the day will come when the harbor is alive with oysters once more, when the water is clear again, when the oysters are no longer just something on a menu, but something that defines this city as much as its bridges and buildings do. And maybe if we're lucky, we'll once again hear the call of the street vendors echoing through the avenues. Fresh oysters, penny apiece.